many times, and in fact I gave lots of hugs to Episcopals. And I see familiar faces out there. The American dream looms large in the consciousness and the visions of its citizens. People from all over the world still long to come to America to fulfill that dream. Martin Luther King spoke about it, saying he had a dream that was bound up in the American dream. I certainly came to this country 50 years ago with that dream. Today, for those of us who achieved that dream, we will designate as being inside the gate. And for those who are clearly still failing to make it, let's designate them as being outside the gate. This morning, the gospel tells of a rich man who lived in luxury, while outside his gate laid a beggar who lived in misery. He was covered with sores, and his only dressing was the dogs who came to lick his wounds. He longed to dumpster dive in the rich man's garbage. Then the poor man dies first, as poor people tend to. And then the rich man also dies, without the trappings of material things, and ego, poverty, and riches switch places. Let us recall how these three of these scriptures today, the Old Testament, the Psalm, and Luke, all speak of a God who gives preference to the suffering and gives ominous warnings to the comfortable. That's you and me. Amos prophesied, alas, or woe, or as Mr. T would say, I pity the fool. I pity the fool who lies in beds of ivory and lounge in their couches. Conversely, the psalmist sings of a God who upholds the cause of the oppressed, gives food to the hungry, and sets the prisoners free. And of course, Jesus told the story here of Luke of Lazarus. By the way, I noticed none of you are naming your children Lazarus. But I understand one starts out dead and stinking, and the other one was stinking while he was alive. Anyway, Jesus puts God's ideas together in this simple tale of miserable Lazarus, who hankered for the food of the rich man, and the rich man who didn't see him. Now I feel quite comfortable to speculate that I have the toughest job here today. That includes the choir and the pastor. A black man from the lowest income Northside community, coming to a largely white, well-off Linden Hills community to talk about the dangers of wealth. It's scary. It's a job better suited for instance, our former governor. But truth be told, we have a lot in common, you and me. I'm one of the 1980s Saturday Night Live stereotype Jamaicans who had 13 jobs, man. As a poor foreign student, I didn't qualify for scholarships or loans, so during the semester while taking 16 to 18 credits, I routinely worked over 40 hours per week, and then during the summers, I worked one full-time and two part-time jobs at minimum wage to pay off my student loans in real time and graduate with no debt. So now that we are all on the same page, let's look at some of the direct and deduced words I called from the readings this morning and that describe both God's at-risk people, those inside the gates, and the people of God that God always champions and always celebrates, those lying outside the gates. First, let's look at how the scriptures describe those inside the gates. It says, we are worry-free, we are secure, we are distinguished, we're admired, we're comfortable, we're endowed, we're indulged. I always muse when I go to a coffee shop in the wealthy of neighborhoods, and the coffee cafe person, they will say, may I help you? Good morning. How are you? May I help you? And then I go to drive up at the window at McDonald's on the north side, and I hear, may I help you? Yes, we are indulged when we can afford the good places. We have mastery, we have skills that are in demand. We are aesthetic, we have good taste, we are fashionable, we have good wardrobes, and we have some luxury and some leisure disproportionately, and we are entertained, whether it be at the Walker, the Guthrie, the Orchestra Hall, the Vikings, or the Twins. And who wouldn't want these things for ourselves and our kids? That is the fulfillment of the American dream. And I have a few of these things. On the other hand, here are the conditions outside the gates that we're all trying to avoid. I guess you could call these the American nightmare. They're oppressed, especially undocumented immigrants. I was one of those guys working illegally on a student visa without permit, and I can tell you, it's a harrowing experience. Every police you see is after you. And then they're poor and low income. Do you know that in 1970, 21% of wages went to the bottom 50%, and 30% of all wages went to the top 10%. Now today, 14% goes to the bottom 50%, and 47% to the top 10%. They're hungry. They use food shelves and free and reduced lunch and cheap empty carbs and unhealthy foods, food desert. They're incarcerated disproportionately. America has the most incarcerated people, 2.2 million people, a 500 increase over the last 4 years. And most of those people come from the African American community disproportionately. There are 7 million people either in jail, prison, parole, and then there's punishment after incarceration. You can't get scholarships, you can't get jobs, you can't get places to live. This is an unforgiving system. They're disabled. You know, every time you hear a gunshot and you see someone killed in the news, well, I can tell you, there's a whole tale of people who have colostomy bags, or paralyzed from the waist down, and paralyzed from the neck down, and severely maimed and wounded that we never hear about. I've met a lot of those people. They're alienated. LGBTQ youth are 6 times more homeless than the typical youth. They are kicked out. And so you can imagine that this is the tip of the iceberg. There are many, many thousands and millions more who are not yet kicked out, who are afraid to be kicked out, who are terrorized by their own identity. They are unhealthy and have low life expectancy. The residents of my community live 8 years less than the residents of this community. And so this community gets their Social Security investment. Immigrants and whites have a death rate in 2005 to 2007 of 230% per 100,000 or less. Blacks and Indians, America's only non-immigrant populations, either brought here and stolen or had their land stolen. They are 700 and 800 per 100,000 people. They're depressed because of the harshness of their life. They're worried, money worries, health worries, childcare worries, transportation worries. They're isolated in the wrong neighborhood, with the wrong name, the wrong color, the wrong accent, sometimes the wrong religion. They're undocumented immigrants. There's a 100-unit apartment complex near my home where they only rent to undocumented immigrants because they don't complain. In fact, Chief Dolan told me once that he knows of a case where someone was robbed and beaten from that apartment, and they called the police, and they were evicted because they brought attention to the building. There's fatherlessness and single parenthood. More than 1 in 4 black men are likely to be incarcerated in a lifetime. And so you have all these single moms, and single parenthood is the biggest contributor to childhood poverty. We are 50th in the 50 states in graduating black kids. They're homeless. Minneapolis has the highest homelessness gap and the highest home ownership gap. Minneapolis has 24% of its black residents owning their own homes, and 76% of whites own their own homes. So here in Minneapolis, here in Minnesota, we live with the largest distance between the mansion within the gates and the people laying at the gates. Between the haves and the have-nots, the whites and people of color. But more so, between whites and blacks and whites and the Indian people, as I said, the only non-immigrants in a nation of immigrants. And these three groups are most entangled in America's shameful history. We would do well today to realize that God's economy, that in God's economy, we the comfortable, those inside the mansion, who enjoy the American dream, who are inside the gate, are the most at risk in the kingdom of God. And that those outside the gates, the Lazaruses, the people God is preoccupied with. In fact, it seems that God thinks the only reason we are allowed to accumulate is to share what we have lavishly and generously. To love those outside the gates as keenly and as attentively as we love ourselves and as we love our loved ones. In fact, we can go further to say that Jesus considers these inconvenient neighbors versions of himself, or as Mother Teresa called them, Jesus in his most distressing disguise. He says that whatever we do for them, we do it for him. He also says in the day of accounting, he will say, I was hungry and thirsty and incarcerated, and you didn't help me. And we will say, what? We didn't see you. And he will say, inasmuch as you helped the least of these, you did it for me. When people ask me why Sandra and I moved to the Northside and changed our careers to seize the opportunities to serve, it is clear by their queries that they do not understand the upside-down God principle that we have discovered in these scriptures. To paraphrase Richard Rohr's infamous or famous book title, we have fallen upwards. They don't understand our ultimate selfishness, that we are simply currying favor with God, that we are noticing Lazarus and giving him water while he is thirsty, so that we will drink together in the bosom of Abraham. That we are coveting the blessings that come with joining with God in the championing of the poor, the unhealthy, the fatherless, and the single mom. But we also understand that from a practical perspective, we are helping to save our nation home from its diminishment among all nations. Because a nation full of Lazaruses is a shame among nations. It has no moral authority. No matter its lofty rhetoric, it will not, or it will rot from the inside out as dependency, crime, violence, disunity, hate, and fear shrink our profile in the world and turn our noble dream into a nightmare. On November 16, Author Parker Palmer will be at Westminster Town Hall. You should go see him. My wife's son is going to be in a dialogue with him there. He says in his book, Healing the Heart of Democracy, why don't we value life, every life, so that no matter whose or where, or understand that the measure of national greatness is not only how successful the strong can be, but how well we support the weak. In fact, I would argue that judgment on any nation increases when the poor proliferate outside the gates, beyond the walls, and we comfortably cannot see, do not see, or pretend not to see them or hear their cries. So let us hasten to the gate together with health care, nourishment, encouragement, empathy, job training, work, livable wages, a second chance, quality child care, a welcome wagon, commitment to brotherhood, tutoring, mentoring, proximity, affinity. Let us chase the dogs and heal the ancient wounds. Let's welcome Lazarus home and save our souls.